Good evening. The first time I voted, I was 4 years old. Now, this wasn't some scheme put together by the dailies. It was my Mexican-American mother teaching me one of the most important lessons of my life. See, it was a cold winter day, election day in the early 90s, and we trekked over in the snow. She carried me in her arms, and we walked into the voting booth at our local elementary school. And at the time, there weren't touch screens. There was something that looked sort of like a book. And I remember something that looked sort of like a shank. And she said, you can go through the booklet and you can punch the names next to your preferred candidate. Or you can go to the front of the book and you can punch to vote straight ticket Democrat or straight ticket Republican. So she took my 4-year-old hand and she wrapped it around that shank, and she wrapped her hand around mine, and we punched straight ticket Democrat. And I said, Mommy, why did we just vote straight ticket Democrat? And she said, Mijo, it's because we're not rich and we're brown. This was my first introduction to identity politics, a term that we hear so much about today. We hear it talked about in the news. There's always some hot take being written on Medium or on some other website. But the identity politics that she taught me today was the identity politics that was defined by the Combahee River Collective. See, the black feminists working in the 1970s and working for their own emancipation and their own liberation realized something. That there was not going to be a movement to liberate them that was not led by them. That the only people that can fight tooth and nail against their own oppression are those that are oppressed. It was this definition of identity politics that led my aunt, Magda Ramirez Castañeda, then a self-identified Chicana living on 18th Street in the 70s and early 80s, to organize in defense of farm workers thousands of miles away in California. She did that not because she had met them, but because she recognized them as us, as one of her people. It was this definition of identity politics that led another Chicagoan and another Mexican-American, Rudy Lozano, to organize a tortilla factory in his community, to give those workers a union, to fight for a new high school for his neighborhood, and to take on the Democratic machine in an attempt to become one of the first Mexican-Americans elected to the Chicago City Council, a venture that cost him his life. Now, when we talk about identity politics today, we're too often told that it's just about representation. That the way that we get free, that the way that we advance, is making sure that someone that just has a name like mine or that shares my complexion has a seat at the table. That we can be liberated if we have a member on the board of Walmart, or if we have a chancellor of the City Colleges of Chicago or a president of CPS. But this deviates and runs against what the black feminists taught us in the Combahee River Collective. And that is that identity politics is not about one person advancing, it's about our collective liberation. See, the feminists of the Combahee River Collective realized that they not only had to fight against their oppression as black people, but they had to fight against their oppression as women. And when you realize that intersection, you realize that none of us are free until we're all free. If you don't quite understand what it is that I'm saying yet, I want you to think about a bird cage. And imagine yourself a little bird. So you're sitting in this bird cage, and the bird cage has these thin wire bars. And if the only thing that you see is your Mexican-American identity as the thing that's holding you back, and you just see that one little bar, you say, hey, I can jump to the left of that, or I can jump to the right of that, and I can get right past that obstacle, and I can be free. But when you begin to see the other bars, the oppression that we face because we're queer, the oppression that we face because we're women, the oppression that we face because we're a disabled person, the oppression that we face because we're poor, then you begin to see the cage that holds us back. So what's the path forward for the Mexican-American community? It's to look back, to embrace that movement that was intersectional, to embrace that movement that told us that we must first recognize our own humanity and use that as a punctum to understand the humanity of everybody else. That's something that happened in 2006, when Republicans controlled the White House and the Senate, and they were poised to pass one of the most anti-immigrant bills in the history of the United States, H.R. 4437. The people took to the streets in an intersectional movement. Folks from all across this globe, immigrants from Asia, from Africa, and yes, from Mexico and Latin America came together and said no. They took to the streets, and we won. So let's build that intersectional movement today. Let's come together as a people. Let us remember who we are. Because we are the folks that own the copyright to Yes We Can. Sí, se puede. We are the sons and daughters of Cesar Chavez, Emma Tenayuca, Rudy Lozano, and Elvira Arellano. We come from a people who know that Emiliano Zapata taught us que es mejor morir de pie que vivir de rodillas. We live in a frightening time, where once again Republicans are in control of the House, of the Senate, and of the White House. But if all of us that feel anxious right now, if all of us that are fearful about our future come together and build that intersectional movement, if we remember that our collective liberation requires that we all be free, that it's not just about one person advancing, but about us tearing down an entire system that oppresses us all, then we can live up to that saying that we've known all along. El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. My name is Carlos Ramirez-Rosa. Thank you for listening to me tonight.